Cincinnati. Today is May 21st, 2007, and today I have the honor of interviewing Jack Osterbrock. Also present our camera operator, Doug McGee, today. So, Jack, it's a pleasure to meet you, and thank you for coming, and I'm really eager to hear your story. I understand from talking to you briefly earlier that you had an interest in radio prior to your entering service, which helped promote your military career. So maybe you could start with that and tell us what happened.
Well, it wasn't unusual for, should I look at the camera?
Once in a while.
For high school boys. In fact, the government was trying to get you interested in electronics because it was new and there wasn't a lot of knowledge, and it was a rather complicated thing. So there was a radio club at Withrow.
Here in Cincinnati, right?
In Withrow High School in Cincinnati. And then, of course, I built transmitters and receivers and fixed radios of all kinds in the basement of my home as a hobby. Actually, I was more interested in that than I was in the academic subjects. I was certainly not the best student in the English class. I didn't care about poetry and
right.
so on. So actually, they flunked me in English, and they held up my graduation until a few months after, when they heard that I was in the Navy. Why, they called me in. I took an exam, and they gave me a high school diploma. So the interest in radio led to the Navy Electronic Technician program, which in about 11 months they produced a semi-electronic engineer, and that could fix radar or any kind of electronic equipment. They started with the basics.
And that's what you participated in, right?
At Texas A&M, they gave basic electric engineering and slide rule, and the trigonometry and the math that was necessary to make computations for reactants and so on, and figure resonant frequencies and that sort of thing. And then they shipped us out to Trader Island, California, and they had 6 months of work on Navy gear. They didn't know where you were going, and they covered everything. Sonar, radar, communication equipment, all types of plotting and so on, as far as figuring course and speed of targets and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then you were assigned, you were given the opportunity to express your preference, and I put in for aircraft carrier, battleship, cruiser, destroyer, and I ended up in amphibious forces.
Amphibious?
Amphibious forces.
Uh-huh.
Alligators.
Well, you put in to maintain the radio and radar equipment on these ships, is that right?
I maintained.
But that's what you put in for. That was with your original intention?
Well, they have technicians aboard all the big ships,
mm-hmm.
because the big combat vessels, they're just the act of firing the guns can do damage to the fragile electronic equipment, or maybe even bust a tube or something like that. They had to have technicians all the time.
Right.
So, but they were getting ready for the invasion of Japan, and they had to have all the LSMs in communication and so on.
The LSM means?
Landing ship medium.
Okay.
And it's a 212-foot diesel-powered landing ship with bow doors, bow ramp, and a stern anchor to pull you back off the beach after you made a landing. So anyway, we had some training in Little Creek, Virginia, and we went down to Galveston, picked up the ship, and did a shakedown. We spent 3 weeks in the Gulf of Mexico, and then they shipped us down to Panama. We went down to Panama and up to the west coast, and we stopped, when we left Galveston, we went to New Orleans and got, everybody was loaded with landing small boats, LCVPs and LCMs. And so we took those to Hawaii, and then we went to Guam, and then we went to Leyte.
Can I ask, how did they transport those?
I think just simply lifted them up and put them in the well deck. The well deck is an open well deck on an LSM. It's all open well deck. And then other times we had trucks too, and Army personnel, and we just simply beached, and the trucks drove off. Or if it was something like small boats, they were usually lifted off by a large ship with derricks and cranes and so on.
Okay.
So anyway, we picked up troops in Guadalcanal, took them to Luzon. Then we picked up troops from Luzon and took them to Okinawa. We were in a large invasion fleet, probably 150 ships. And I guess the one star activity that stood out in my Navy career, the lead ship going into Okinawa, the radar went out. Oh. And I was the only technician available. They broke formation and took me up to the lead ship, and I jumped over across the rail onto the other ship and fixed the radar for them.
Wow.
So anyway, I got some recognition for that.
Very instrumental for the success of that operation.
They felt that it was so important for the lead ship to have radar that they changed formation and took me up to the lead ship, and I fixed it. So it was fortunate that I had paid attention to all my instructions, and I was able to do it. I never ran into any piece of radar gear or radio equipment that I couldn't fix. So
you did a lot better in the electronics classes than you did in English.
Right. So anyway, then we stayed. They needed somebody to do smoke patrol, to put smoke around the large ships. And we did that at Okinawa.
The purpose of that was to what?
Well, to keep the kamikazes from hitting the big APAs and AKAs and the larger ships. We put smoke around them.
So they couldn't see them?
So the Japs couldn't see them, but we had air raids almost every night.
Wow.
And we always had Jap planes flying over. We couldn't see them, but we could hear them. And the next day you'd get the report on how many ships were sunk. It was a pretty rough deal at Okinawa for quite a long time. So we did the smoke deal for quite a long time.
How was morale at the point with these constant attacks?
Oh, it's crazy. It's all young people. Here I was 19, 20 years old, and they were depending on me to fix radar. I'm just a kid. But you never worried about anything. Nothing can happen to you.
Invincible.
Yeah, at 20 years old, and nothing can happen to you.
Mhm.
And there's no way a Jap could kill you, because you're going to do that to them.
Uh-huh. Wow.
So, but morale was excellent. Everybody did their job, and nobody worried about anything. And so anyway, we made a number of trips back and forth from Luzon to Okinawa, reinforcing the troops. And then they were getting ready for the invasion. This was before the bombs were dropped.
Invasion of Japan. Right.
Japan. And we were loading troops at Luzon, and we got word that some new kind of a bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. The officers called me in there and said, "Well, Osterbrock, what's this new kind of bomb?" And I said, "Well, if you get a chain reaction with uranium or a radioactive material, you will get a big explosion." And so then they dropped a second bomb.
But how did you know that? Where did you study
Well,
that?
I was always interested in science.
So this was stuff you studied on your own?
That's crazy. The teachers just let me be. And they had Encyclopedia Britannicas, and I spent the whole day reading the encyclopedias. And I let the other kids do the poetry and all that kind of stuff. I didn't care about novels or romance. I just studied my science. That's what I was interested in.
Mm-hmm.
Electricity and science and solar system and origin of the universe, and those were the things that I was interested in. And still
So
am.
you were able to give them some
Yeah,
insight
I could
as to what
explain
kind
to the
of
officers
what this might have been.
what this bomb was all about and so on. So anyway, we continued. We got into a big formation, and we went up to Japan and made the invasion just the same as we would have if it had been a hostile operation. So we landed troops.
Well, was the war ended by then, at that time?
Well, it ended within 10 days, 2 weeks after the bombs were dropped.
But then you did the peacetime invasion, is that what you're saying?
Right, we did a peacetime invasion, which was really the exact same plan that would have been if it had been a hostile invasion.
Wow.
So we landed troops on Shikoku, Matsuyama, in that area, and then we were occupying Shikoku, and they were being supplied from Kobe and Osaka, and the LSMs were the ferry. The supply trucks would drive on the LSM. The LSMs would go over to Shikoku and beach, and the Army was supplied that way. And of course, sometimes a case of grapefruit juice or orange juice or something would disappear, but you know.
We won't tell anybody about that.
No. So, but anyway, we did that for quite a long time, and then we took troops from the south part of Japan and took them up to Yokohama and Japan.
And during this time, you were maintaining equipment and...
Actually, there wasn't a whole lot of stress, and there wasn't very many things going wrong, and I didn't have a whole lot to do, really.
Mm-hmm.
And they had me doing all kind of other things that an electronic technician was not supposed to do. So we did the things. There was a cabaret in Yokohama. They had pretty Japanese girls, and the hours were 12 noon to 5 o'clock, and you got 2 sakis, 2 beers, and you could dance with the girls, and at 5 o'clock they cleared out and
5 p.m.
5 p.m. and they ran you out of the dance hall, and the girls went home and you went home. And it was a, you know, a straight, clean operation.
Nobody got into trouble.
Nobody got into trouble and so on. Anyway, we did that for quite a long time, and then of course there was a point system, and well, I was single and young and had no dependents, and had less than 3 years, so it took me a while to accumulate points. But I finally got enough points to get a discharge, and then they transferred me to, the ship's name was Cascade, and they were going to the Philadelphia Navy Yard. So they put me on there as a technician and a radar operator. And so then we went to Hawaii and Panama and Philadelphia. And from there, they sent me back to Great Lakes, and I was discharged. And I hadn't spent any money, but I had a couple of years of pretty nice pay, plus 10%. So I had a pretty good amount of money when I was discharged. And so I went to Ohio State and graduated from Ohio State, got a job with RCA, and married my college sweetheart. And I don't know, they must have heard that I was married, so they put me on a night shift. So my wife put up with that for about 1.5 years, and she says, Jack, this little town in Marion, Indiana, there's nothing here that I can do, and I'm fed up with you're being gone all the time. I said, well, what are we going to do? And he says, let's move to Columbus. That's where I met her. So anyway, we did that. We moved to Columbus, and I got a job with a electronics wholesaler, and I did that for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually I got into the family business in Cincinnati. My dad had a warehouse business.
I see.
And so I was a salesman in the family business for quite a long time. And then I started, I was more interested in things mechanical. And I started a manufacturing business, rebuilding clutches and brake shoes and things in that area.
Wow. I was wondering, when you were in Japan, did you have a chance to get some idea of what the citizens were feeling? I mean, there were some Japanese girls there at the commissary or canteen. But, other than that, did they resent you being there or distrust you? Or?
No, there was no resentment. It's interesting. A short time after I arrived in Shikoku, they were establishing a port directory unit.
Port directory? Okay.
And they needed somebody to install the equipment and set up a tower and set up a ship pilot operation where the big ships would come in and they would put a Japanese pilot aboard. But anyway, I had a chance to work with Japanese men doing the work. I supervised them and they did the work. And none of them were resentful or hostile or uncooperative. And you had a chance to meet Japanese people, mostly young people, and none of them had any resentment or any hate for the American forces that were occupying. There was no problem at all.
Did they talk about there having been a lot of propaganda as to what would happen to the citizens if the Americans arrived?
Oh yeah, yeah. the propaganda system, the Japs put out the idea that the Americans would come and just raise havoc, and there would be all kinds of plundering and rape and all the rest of it, and that did not happen.
Of course, it didn't happen, but I'm wondering, you know, did it take them long to realize that that wasn't going to happen, or that there was?
I don't think it ever became an issue.
Mm-hmm.
I think they realized very quickly, right after the truce was signed in Tokyo Bay, and the agreement and so on. Right after that was done, MacArthur showed his hand and made it very clear that it was going to be a lawful, orderly occupation, and that the Japanese would have every opportunity to rebuild and develop their economy.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what happened, and Japanese people responded, and everything worked out just fine.
Great. You were a ham operator, radio operator before you went in service.
I was a bootlegger. I didn't get my license,
Oh.
but there were a lot of people operating without a license.
Uh-huh.
And you'd make up a call letter. So, but that was 55, 60 years ago. I don't think they can get.
No, I think the statute of limitations is run out on that one. But I was just curious, were you able to do any amateur radio while you were in the service? Was that at all possible?
No. All the amateur transmitting activity was forbidden. That it was that way or their way.
Well, I can understand why.
Of controlling espionage and
Yeah.
and getting unlawful information out of the country.
There'd be no way to control it.
They stopped it.
Yeah.
They stopped it. So although there was a lot of German activity in an effort to do that, and they did have secret transmitters, and they did do some transmit some information out of the country.
Germany, you say?
Yeah, the Germans did.
The German citizens, I guess you're saying.
Mm-hmm. So.
The resistance.
But there was no radio amateur transmitting done at all from the beginning until the end, and then it was re-established a short time after the war was over, where then the hams were back on the air again.
Even those in the military then were allowed to?
We did not. I didn't. First thing, the radio operators had to copy Fox. The Honolulu and the mainland United States was constantly sending out what they call Fox, all kinds of coded information, and they had to be copied, and the officers decoded it, and so that had to be the priority, and the facilities were pretty well taken up. There was very little ham activity that I was aware of. Mm-hmm. Even after the peace came along, and of course so many of the technicians that had time were getting out. It was a mad rush to get out. It was partly psychology. Yeah. Hey, I've been restricted now for 3 years. I went out of this prison. So that's where it was.
Is there any part of your experience, your service, any stories that we haven't covered that you'd like to mention?
Oh, just a little sideline. It was interesting. The Grand Cherry Cabaret had a write-up in Life magazine.
Grand Cherry
Cabaret.
Where was that?
That was in Tokyo.
Okay.
And that's where the Japanese girls would dance, but that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And But it was interesting to be tied into a big magazine article, and you were there and you did that. So, but there was a lot of opportunity and a lot of things to see in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Japan is an interesting country. So, but basically you just did your job and did what the officers said and stayed out of trouble. And I was never in trouble. Of course, you know, there's always some people that get into trouble.
Sure, sure.
But I never was.
Wow.
So,
Very, very interesting story, and again, I thank you for coming today, and thank you very much for your service, your willingness to put your life on the line to save our way of life, our freedom.
well, it was an interesting experience. It was a chance to see the world and also to get a good education and realize that what I was seeing of the Navy was a good part. We had good officers and well-run activities, and we always accomplished what we were supposed to do. And it was a background later on. When I was in college, I got an officer's commission in the reserves,
Mm-hmm.
and I was in a unit at Fort Hayes in Columbus, and I did that for 10 years.
I see. Yeah.
And so the whole thing was an education and something that I'm proud that I had a chance to do it.
Well, that's great, and you know, thanks to competent people like you and many, many, many others, this was a success. And finally, thanks for fixing that radar.
Well, I was very, very pleased that I could get that thing fixed up in about 20 minutes. I had it going.
That's great.